Hey everyone, welcome back to the Overseers. This is Proilios and I'm joined as usual by my co-host Nightwing. We are going to be reviewing the Seoul Dynasty's roster for Season 4 of the Overwatch League today. And it's a pretty interesting one because a lot of the players from the Dynasty have been retained for this season. And what are your general thoughts on this, Nightwing? Because this roster had a very unique structure in the sense that they had both their main tanks playing for most of the season, right? And then a pretty stable DPS line as well. So, what are your thoughts in general about this team?
After Profit and Gesture split off from Profit, Gesture, and Badosin split off from London as they look to sign a new roster in season three, uh, I was quite happy to see them come over to Seoul, where I think almost every Korean player wants to play for this team just because it's based in their home country. Especially considering that in season three, the plans were that homestands were going to happen. But even during the pandemic situation, it's just more comfortable to have a team that, you know, is based out of your own country. So I was really happy to see that because I'm a huge fan of Profit, especially ever since the beginning of season one. And yeah, so this team had kind of a rocky season last season in season three. Uh, they would they were just wildly up and down. They were very, I think, meta dependent. If the wrong meta would arrive, Soul would just dip down very hard. Uh, that being said, there is just something about these former London players that came into Seoul. They have this playoffs ghost that just enters into them, and that's what uh, put them as the grand finalists uh, for season three. Which I thought was very interesting. I didn't think it was very deserved. I think Seoul were pretty much being referred to as the kind of Washington Justice, but for the Asia region, as both of these teams had a run into the playoffs because of uh, the kind of rule set that was applied. Because both Seoul and Washington were only allowed to play in the playoffs because of that rule where all the teams were allowed to play in the playoffs because of the I believe it was because the number of matches was different for teams.
Yeah.
So yeah, and they just kind of ran away with it, which I can't fault them for. That's more of a league ruling issue. But yeah, as for just a general overview of this team, I think yeah, it's not surprising honestly to me that with the kind of management Soul has that they would retain these players. I mean, why would you want to get rid of someone like Profit or someone like Gesture? I mean, Gestures sometimes he's up and down, but he can really perform at the highest level when he's really feeling it. Is not as consistent as someone like Smurf, obviously, uh, but he's quite good. And Prophet is just one of the goats of Overwatch, in my opinion. I think he has a very wide hero pool. He can try and pick up most things, uh, and so a lot of these players, I'm not very surprised that they decide to keep them. Uh, the only new addition they had was Saebyeolbe, and that shows that they're not trying to like diverge too much from the kind of style they were showing. Uh, it's just going to be interesting to see how each piece kind of contributes this season as well. So with that, I think we can just get into like the individual pieces of the roster. Do you want to start off with the tanks?
Yep, sure. So, just for new viewers or listeners, we usually go over the tanks first, then the DPS, then the supports, then the coaching staff, and then round things off with our final thoughts. So, let's get into the tank line then, which is Marvel, Gesture, and Toyou. Now, I'm afraid to label these players because Soul doesn't really care whether a player's a main tank player or an off tank player. They just sort of see what goes. and it worked for them last season, right? So let's just talk about these players then. Do you want to kick things off with Marvel, Nightwing?
Yeah, sure. Marvel is an off slash main tank who was supposed to come into the league as a main tank player, but they just glued him to Sigma jail uh, during season 3, which I don't blame them for. I think he did quite decent on the Sigma, honestly. Not not at the very top tier, but he's good. Um, that's all I really have to say about him. I mean, it's not a particularly bad thing that he's on the roster, but he's not like an exceptional player in my eyes. Uh, it might just be because the other players on Soul, such as Gesture and Prophet, are just a lot more flashy. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about him. What do you think?
Yeah, so I too think that Marvel isn't like particularly amazing. Uh, his flexibility is a pretty good asset for the team, and the fact that he's one of those main tank players who can play a decent wrecking ball as well, even though we didn't get to see that much of it last year. Uh, that's a pretty like decent advantage for them. Um, but yeah, the fact that he can flex to off tanks like Sigma and well, actually just Sigma. His Diva and Zarya weren't that good. But that makes him like gives him some more value. So I think even in terms of quality, if he's not like an insanely good player, he's good to have on the team just because he can play in a wide variety of metas. So yeah, those are pretty much my thoughts. I mean, he was quite good in season two as a main tank because he played all four main tanks to a good level. But with the amount of time he's put into playing this off tank role in the last season, one has to wonder how high his main tank level still is. And just because there are still like a handful of main tanks who are like like pretty exceptional in the league, I don't think he's going to match up to some of them. But yeah, still a decent player. And I actually think quite similarly of Gesture in the sense that he's good. He's also got like really good mechanical skill, as we saw with his Roadhog play in the playoffs last year. Uh, he's a good main tank. I feel like he's slightly overrated because of his performance in the playoffs or his synergy with Profit. I think that makes people think he's individually better than he actually is. But still, an important piece of the Gesture Profit duo. Well, he's literally a half of it. And yeah, I think he just contributes a lot to the team because of his synergy with Profit. But that doesn't mean that he's individually that good. So I think Marvel Gesture, like a pretty average main tank duo, or like maybe an off tank flex in there because of Marvel, but yeah, average, I would say. What do you think about Gesture, Nightwing?
Yeah, I think considering how consistently it happens, I think there is something to be said about Gesture and Profit in high pressure situations. I mean, every time they have to clutch, they do step their level up. Even if that doesn't mean that he's definitely not very consistent. I would not say that just because his kind of playoff or tournament level performance is very good, that puts him at the very top. But I mean, there's definitely something something to it. And I think especially this year when they're having, I believe, 4 tournaments,
Yeah,
uh, there's definitely a lot of situations where maybe Gestures, feeling the drip. Maybe he's just gonna go out there and pound a bit. I think Gestures, um, he's not exceptionally like great. He's not competing for the top spots definitely, but he's not bad. He's at least average, I would say, and that's good enough, honestly. I think as long as you have synergy with your team, you understand how to play a particular playset. I think what the team did kind of suffer with was that, uh, I mean, Gesture kind of has to be the one that's doing the pathing for all the metas that they're playing, right? As a main tank, you're kind of the one responsible for pathing, and uh, a lot of the kind of meta dependent like rotations is kind of dependent on the main tank. And you looked at how in particular metas, Gesture would just absolutely do very well, but then in other metas they would just not be able to figure anything out, and they would play quite poorly. And I think Gesture has some stock to you know be blamed for that. And I just hope that they can find a little more consistency with Gesture, where he is able to expand his types of play styles a bit more, so that the team can excel in more than just like divey metas and work with like other things as well.
And do you want to also talk about Toyou then, Nightwing? You can go first.
Yeah, they've converted Toyou from I believe a two-way player to a permanent spot on the roster now.
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
that correct? Yeah.
yeah. They have.
So Toyou, I mean, I can only really think of his diva play, which is fine, uh, not bad. Uh, I would say at least average, maybe a bit above. I don't really know. Honestly, Diva has been out of the meta in the past season, mostly apart from that Rhine Diva thing in the beginning. And Tuyu wasn't signed at that point, if I remember correctly. So haven't been able to see too many looks from him because they just put Prisoner Marvel in Sigma jail into the roster most of the time. But I mean, he adds an actual, like a real off tank player to the roster, which is definitely good because Marvel is not exactly a Zarya Diva player. So yeah, I think he's got a lot to prove really, and like that's all I really think. What do you think?
Uh, I also think that he's probably going to be an average off tank. Uh, I need to see more of him to know where exactly he stands because, like you said, Marvel was just playing for most of last season. From what we saw from 2U when I think they played in the Nexus Cup, right? Uh,
Yeah,
his Sigma seemed to be good. So, well, that's one thing, but it it's debatable whether or not he's better than Marvel at that hero. Again, not enough data to actually like confirm that. But like I said, in situations like these where you just bump up a player that isn't like spoken about too much, it's safe to assume that they have something special in them that the coach has seen. So I think he's probably going to be average, and yeah, but that's about it. If a player is like really really good, then we usually hear about it from like some of the other sources in the esports industry, and we haven't heard much about to you. So yeah,
the thing about basing anything off of the Nexus Cup was that it was just a mess. Like
true.
you, it was very hard to really figure out if anyone was a clear winner in the next Nexus Cup. It
Yeah.
felt like everyone won and everyone lost. I mean, you look at the matches that happened. Seoul beats Guangzhou, okay, and Guangzhou beats Dallas, but Dallas beats Seoul.
Yep.
So what?
Yeah.
Okay, and then alongside that, you look at Shanghai beats Dallas, Shanghai loses to Seoul, but then Dallas beats Seoul.
Mm-hmm.
So, so I mean, what is happening in that cup? I
Essentially
mean,
rock paper scissors.
yeah, I mean, I was very sleepy when I was watching the tournament, so I wasn't able to analyze it. But I was just not sure, like
Yeah.
if
True.
anyone was actually winning or we are all just sitting here suffering, looking at the live stream. Uh, so yeah, I think Tuyu will really just have to prove himself in the season. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not putting too much stock into Nexus Cup, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I
Like
agree. I
in
agree.
the beginning, when we started these reviews and we were like halfway through the cup, I was thinking, it's going to be an actual tournament, but literally everybody is was beating everyone in this cup, and I don't really believe that much in those results anymore.
Yeah.
Especially since Dallas will be playing in NA anyway, so they'll only really face off against the Asia teams when they have to come over to Hawaii for like the finals of the tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, true. And I think a lot of these teams might have treated these um, the Nexus Cup as like a sort of scrim, right? So they might have been experimenting with different compositions for all we know. So again, really not, we can't put too much stock into it, like you said. And that said, I think let's move on to the DPS line then, shall we?
Yeah, sure.
Yep. Okay. So there are three DPS on the Soul Dynasty this year. That's Fitz and Prophet, carried over from last year, and then Saebyeolbe, who's coming in from the NYXL. So let's first talk about Fitz, and I think I'll kick things off here. So, as all of us know, Fitz is primarily a hit scan player. He put up some really great performances last year on heroes like Widow, with which he at times contested Dance, and even things like McCree. And there was one game on King's Row where Soul was playing against the Dragons, and he just popped off on Hanzo as well. So with these heroes covered, I think he just displayed his raw mechanical skill. One weakness that I have noticed about him is that usually his the quality of his performance scales with how well his tanks are suited to the current meta. That's what at least I have noticed. If Fitz doesn't get enough space from his tanks, he doesn't really perform that well. I mean this can be said for pretty much any DPS player, but like I noticed it in particular for Fitz. So if you notice like double shield, then yeah, the Marvel Gesture were really good at it. So then Fitz was just popping off on Ash. But then if you went to like a Winston Diva meta and he was playing, let's say, Sombra, then there wasn't like that much his team could do because like Marvel had a weak Diva. So like I said, his quality of play scaled directly with how good his tanks were in any particular meta. But if you just leave it to his raw mechanical skill, I think there's very few hit scans in the league that can compare right now. So do you agree with that, Nightwing?
I don't agree with the last line. Like I really like Fitz. He's quite good. And I was very surprised when he was showing up as Widow, like when Widow was being played, especially. And you're right that I think you are right that his level of play scales with the team, because uh, I mean that's kind of a consequence of his hero pool as well. Like with Widow, I mean you can obviously just pop off with mechanical skill, but you do need your team to create space for you to be able to take alternate angles, and you need your team to be pushing into corners so that you kind of lure the enemies out. Then you can get free shots on them. Similarly with Hanzo, but with Hanzo you can still do a bit of spam, whereas Widow you just have to click heads. They have to be in your LOS. With Doom, uh, obviously you can do crazy rollouts and everything, but if you have a Zarya bubble or some other kind of peel with you, then you can do significantly more. It's just that his hero pool is that that his scaling with the team's ability is just a consequence of his hero pool. I think individually quite a good DPS player, not at the very top,
Yeah,
but he's quite good. I think above league average
true.
slightly.
Yeah. Okay, then should we move on to Profit? Do you want to kick things off there?
Yeah, I can. I think Prophet is, like I said, would be regarded as one of the goats of Overwatch, or at least during his time in Overwatch League. But even before that, he did quite well. I think last season, uh, Prophet did struggle picking up the Echo compared to many other uh, players that had a wide hero pool, and Soul did suffer because of that. Um, but then eventually the playoffs meta used him mostly on Hanzo, if I remember correctly, and then some Tracer
They played him on
and
Ash and more than
Ash.
Hanzo, but yeah, there was some Hanzo there.
No, wait. Who was on Hanzo then? The final map of the finals, that was him on Hanzo, right? When he was playing
It,
Hanzo on Hollywood.
it might be. Actually, Seoul was. I can't remember because Seoul was one of the few teams that played Widow Ash a lot more.
Yeah, they
So,
did. They,
yeah.
they did the Widow Hanzo, and Shock was mirroring them on Hollywood.
And Striker had popped off. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Striker was on Hanzo and Prophet was on Hanzo.
Hmm.
So that was it. And yeah, he was on Ash as well. Um, he did struggle picking up Echo, which I think a lot of other flex players had an easier time on. But Prophet is still a great player. He definitely has a spot on this roster. His Tracer, I would still argue, is one of the best in the world. Striker is obviously like probably the best Tracer, but Prophet is up there. And yeah, I think I'm almost a bit confused as to what Saebyeolbe's role is going to be, except just being a sub in for Profit, because Saebyeolbe has been mostly known as a like a tracer one trick. He does pick up the McCree here and there, but I think honestly, like if you wanted McCree, Fitz could probably play that. So yeah, I mean Profit, great to keep. He's just a franchise player. I think even though he's been disturbed from his original franchise over at London, because Cloud9 just don't seem to like keeping the same player for some reason on any of their esports rosters, not even just Overwatch. So yeah, I mean, similar to Carpe, I think he's just a player that you can't not have in the league, right? That would just be sad. Um, so yeah, I'm happy to see Prophet still on the roster. I want to see him do well. Bit disappointed in his flexibility in picking up the Echo last season, but that's okay. He'll he'll work through it. I believe in Prophet. Uh, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Prophet is one of the most flexible players in the Overwatch League. He has already shown us how good he is on projectile heroes like Farah, Genji, Hanzo. His tracer is excellent. He can also play hit scan really well, so he's just got all bases covered on DPS. I think it suffices to say that he's one of the most individually skilled players in the world, along with Decay probably. Um, I think he just loses out on being a god tier flex DPS for me because of his Echo. Because Echo, like, I mean, if you just ignore the fact that Echo is in the game, Prophet is an absolute god. But
Yep.
the yeah, but the thing is, Echo ever since her release has always been viable in some form or the other. If there is like, if there is a map, then Echo is probably good on some phase of it. So the team loses out on that a bit, but I mean, yeah, you can put Profit on another DPS to compensate for that because he can play like Genji, Farah, Tracer, which can be like improvised in even in an Echo meta. But yeah, he just could have improved at that hero during the off season, like you said. So really nothing to complain about with Profit. And speaking of Saebyeolbe, because you were saying that what role is he going to play on this team, which is a very fair point. I think they just brought him in for like more external reasons, such as like making the team more marketable, like even more marketable to Korean fans. Because Saebyeolbe is one of the most respected like veteran presences in the league. He's also got a great deal of experience, and he's kind of a leadership figure, right? Which I think Seoul was lacking so far. Uh, but overall, I like he didn't look good. He didn't look very good last year on the NYXL, but I think it was just the whole team that didn't look good because IMT was sort of misleading in his approach. Overall, I think Saebyeolbe still has something in him. I think he can still play well. But if you, like when you've got Fitz and Profit, you probably will not be fielding Saebyeolbe. Uh, I think he'll probably be reserved for something like a Tracer Genji comp where you want Profit on Genji and then you put Saebyeolbe on Tracer because Fitz can't play it. Or if you
Yeah,
have like
welcome to welcome to
20,
2070.
yeah, and then maybe there's a comp where you need Sombra and you need a hit scan, so then you put Saebyeolbe on Sombra and you put Fitz on hit scan. But then you could also put Profit on hit scan and Fitz on Sombra. So again, it's just like really puzzling. But I don't think Saebyeolbe is like a washed player. Many people say that he is. I think he's still got it in him. Soul just needs to utilize him in the right way if and when they need to put him in. But yeah, other than that, I think he's fine. He's not a liability. What do you think about him?
You know which hero I would like to see Saebyeolbe over anyone else on the Soul roster?
Tell me.
I think his Reaper might be the best DPS. Like like his Reaper might be better than the other two DPS on the roster. Like I just feel like that.
Mm-hmm.
He's
Could be.
he's done quite decent on the Reaper. I mean he's known for Tracer, but I don't know. Maybe there's a Winston Ryan meta for some reason, and Saebyeolbe just has to pick up the two shotguns. Like, let's go. He's definitely a much more level-headed player than Jester and Prophet, I think. Those guys are kind of like a bit more aggressive. So I think he at least brings some just better team mentality, if nothing else. And I mean, they can always just farm him for content. I mean, they were able to do that with Philip Graham. So Saebyeolbe, who can actually play the game, can definitely do that. I mean, NYXL were using him for like tracer guides and content like that, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there's definitely something you can do with that there. Uh, but apart from that, not much else to say about
He he
Saebyeolbe.
he could be the Torbjorn specialist, given how he shared his expert opinions with the experimental patch panel last week. So they could just put him on top. Maybe he's
Yeah.
just that good and we don't know about it. But yeah, I think jokes aside, let's move on to the support line, and that's Anamo and Creative. So I think this support line is quite creative, honestly, and not just their flex support. Um, should I kick things off with Anamo?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So despite what like a lot of people say that Anamo is not that good, I honestly am pretty high on him. I think his Mercy is pretty good. Uh, he's one of the most stable main supports in the league, I think. Even though he's not flashy, not one to make plays, he's still like he never feeds. He dies very less overall. Has pretty safe positioning. Uh, and the fact that he doesn't make plays is okay, I think, because this team's DPS have like such huge pop off potential that Anamo doesn't really need to do that. Like he can just rely on his explosive teammates to do the needful and just be there to enable everyone. Um, Historically, NYXL has got like a pretty good track record with main supports, which is essentially just him and Ark. But I think they've still come out quite well, and yeah, I think to have him is a pretty a pretty solid signing. I think. What are your thoughts?
I think you can't blame Animo for playing passive. I mean, he cannot play the same Lee on FD God like feed or pop off style because there was a feed or pop off player right next to him that he had to peel at all times, which was in Jejonak. I mean, it's just smart of Animo to not also go and jump off the map at the same time, right?
True.
Um, and so it's really not something you can blame Animo for. I think Animo probably did better than Arc in the main support role with NYXL, and that's quite. I mean, Arc wasn't great, but like that still speaks to some volume that he is a good player, and I think he's definitely not as washed or as bad as people think he is. It's just that he enables his team a lot better, um, especially when they have aggressive pieces in the lineup, and they do with especially with Profit and Gesture. So I think he'll fit in just fine. Um, yeah, I think he's quite well rounded. His break isn't like top tier, if I remember correctly, but it's good. Um, I think that's just because if you try and think of a top tier break, you want to see sometimes them lighting up the kill feed, but Anamo just isn't the kind of player to do that. But yeah, I mean, he's solid. He's not bad.
Hmm. And should we then talk about creative? And do you want to kick things off with him?
Yeah, I mean, sure. Creative. Uh, Brosen was the one that was on flex support last year, coming in from London, having played with Gesture and Profit. But I think that that kind of playstyle wasn't working too well for them at times. Uh, I think people are a bit too high on creative because he did well in on Ana a few times, but I think he's quite unproven on other flex supports. I mean, his Zen is decent, but I haven't seen much of his BAP, at least to my memory, and that's another very important hero. And if Anamo's on Lucio, you have to see how good Creative's Moira will be. There's just a lot of other question marks that you have to really figure out, and you will only figure out once Creative gets more playtime. And I think that's something that still like is something that remains to be seen. I think you can't make a very harsh like judgment on him right now. Like on either extreme, you can't call him very good or very bad just because you've only mainly seen like one or maybe two heroes from him. So I just want to see what creative can bring to the table. Maybe he'll be creative.
Yeah, I think creative did show some promise last year. I mean, he's objectively good. Yeah, but I mean, he's on flex support, right? There's the market is stacked as we know, and even though he's objectively good on relative terms, he's not going to be that good according to me. He's probably not a standout player. As long as he's stable, I think that's still good enough for Seoul at this point because they have got that explosive potential in Fitz and Profit. Um, but I mean, yeah, that's pretty much it. Like we need a bigger sample size to judge creative form, and until that happens, we can't really comment on him too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So should we then close the chapter on the supports and then we can just talk about Changgoon a little bit, the head coach. So
Yeah, you can take that one. Honestly, I don't know that much about Changgoon.
yeah, like neither do I. So I mean, we haven't heard too much about we not too much. We haven't heard about how he is as a coach. At least not in like not from any of the content I've come across. Uh, but he has good like experience now working with a championship roster. He got sold to the grand finals, but I mean, the DPS did a lot of heavy lifting there, so I don't know how much strategy factored into it. It was just Profit and Fitz clicking heads. And as we saw, they were a very like inconsistent team last year. It was essentially a coin flip in every meta to decide whether or not they would be good. So I don't know if Changgoon is actually that good or if it's just his DPS that make the team look good. So I think if he gets the team some tournament wins, I will rate him highly, but maybe not highly, just well. But until then, it's just a bit of a question mark as to how good he actually is. Uh, like, still has to be proven as a coach. Essentially, that's all I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, the only positive thing I can really say about him is just that he apart from Krusty's just network of like his family of coaches, like his coaching factory. Uh, Changgoon is one of the few coaches outside the that system that has actually been on two grand finals competing teams,
Mm, yeah,
like for two out of the three seasons.
yeah.
Uh, and one of the few coaches that has been on a winning, like a league winning roster because he did coach London for season one. So like, there's definitely something to be said about that there. Uh, I don't know how much you would really blame or credit him for Seoul's performance in season two, but yeah, I mean, he's at least worked with some good teams, and he definitely has some familiarity and probably has some kind of decent hierarchical system working with Profit and Gesture.
Hmm.
So because he's been working with them for like a very long time, so that's a plus point. But apart from that, I don't have much to really say. I think more than the coaching staff, I'm not, just a little bit concerned about what Cloud9 will do at any time. To be perfectly honest with you, I mean, wait, no, not
Cloud
Cloud9.
Nine.
I think of Profit. I think of London Spitfire. I'm okay. Gen.G, I am actually completely confident in. Gen.G is a very competent organization. They will pick up any sport and do quite well in them. I was looking at a tweet from, I think, the CEO of Gen.G yesterday, and he was like, Valorant second, Overwatch second, two or three other esports second, and it's like a sad face or like a crying face. And I mean, that's the kind of org Gen.G kind of aspires to be, where they're trying to win in everything, and they're second place in everything, which is still quite an achievement. And yeah, I mean, Gen.G does well with that. They have they've been running a decent academy system with Gen.G in contenders as well, and so yeah, that's not something I'm very concerned about. Uh, yeah, I, I, I think I'm just letting out my frustrations about Cloud9 because I forgot to mention that in the London Spitfire episode. Have we done the London
We
Spitfire
haven't done the
episode?
London Spitfire episode.
Okay,
I
I
think
am.
your
I
thought process has officially C9 right now.
Yeah. This is what happens when I don't get enough sleep. Um, yes. This is why Proilios should host and I should be the co-host. The co is very important.
You do realize
Uh,
that co means at the same level, right, Nightwing? It's not
no,
sub host, it's not
no,
sue host.
I am an employee host.
Um,
I'm a subservient host that doesn't remember which org we're talking about, which is okay because it comes down to the players, it comes down to the coaches. The org just has to like buy them a house or not fire them or not do whatever Immortals Gaming is doing with LA Valiant.
hire a
God
bus
bless those
driver.
that roster. Yeah, not turn your player into a bus driver. It's the simple things that the org has to do to not be terrible. And I respect Gen.G enough to not do that. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, good enough, good enough. So, uh, I think let's round things off with our final thoughts. So, in summary of my thoughts and opinions, I think the tank line for the team is quite average this year. The DPS line is, I think, in a really good spot overall because of like the profits DPS duo essentially, and then the additional sort of flexibility, veteran experience, and leadership that Saebyeolbe provides, and just the fact that he can be subbed in on some of these hit scan flanker roles. Um, the support line is, it's good. I think it could be like average or linger somewhere above or below it. Changgoon still unproven. So I think overall this team is like looking to be a bit above average. But I mean, a lot of this stuff is based on a small sample size. Like for example, Toyou and Creative's level of play. But yeah, these are just like opinions at this point. They can definitely change later, and we can go more into the specifics in our power rankings episode. But yeah, you can share your closing thoughts as well, Nightwing.
I think you'll really get to kind of get a feel of what Soul are like. right on the first day of Overwatch League, actually, because they're up against Philadelphia Fusion, who is a team that I think we'll have a decent idea about, at least much more clearer than Seoul. I think even if they have like a new main tank, obviously, uh, that's going to be just a banger of a match, and I think that one will kind of set up Seoul's momentum for the rest of the season. Uh, yeah, I think there are some question marks about the roster, which is, I mean, we'll just have to see how those go. I'm not too confident in them being surprisingly just like the best off tank or flex support around, just like a hidden gem or something. Because if uh, a player in contenders is like that, then you'll normally hear chatter about them,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like Mag has had so much hype coming into the season, and looking into the kind of like open scrims that are happening, he is delivering on those. I think with Creative and Toyou, they're like middle of the pack, but they can be developed into something greater. I think that comes down to the coaching staff, comes down to how well they're conducting scrims, stuff like that. Uh, just how well the entire teams understands the meta. Uh, so yeah, it's just something that we'll have to see. Soul overall, I'm not expecting them to dominate the season or dominate the region, really, but they should be a good contender. If it's just that again, my concern is just that can they actually figure out what meta is going on and actually see like what other teams are doing instead of
Mm-hmm.
look, we have dive now because the dev team decided to like buff Tracer, give her 500 HP. Okay, cool. Profit, go in there, shoot people. I mean, if Solar just gonna work on gesture and Profit, waiting until the meta finds comfort picks for them, then Soul is in for a rough time. It's just that the level of coaching has to be better for Soul this season. Otherwise, they're going to just have those ridiculously stupid just drops in performance, which really should not be happening at a professional league, where the entry requirement is that you're supposed to be flexible not only for your hero pool but also for the kind of play styles that you need to play. That's my only real concern about Seoul. But apart from that, they should be a good contender overall.
Okay. And yeah, so actually, I'm very keen on knowing what our viewers think of this team. So if you guys watch this video, then be sure to share your thoughts about the Seoul Dynasty in the comments. And do you want to round things off in this episode, Nightwing? Oh, and also, which team are we doing next? Should we do the London Spitfire since you mentioned them?
Yeah, we'll do quote unquote Gen.G London Spitfire since we've done quote unquote Cloud9 Seoul Dynasty. Um, I don't mind doing that. I think that team is very interesting to look at because once again, Mr. Jack strikes again, scraps his previous roster and comes in with the Western roster, who has been dominating as British Hurricane as their academy team. That's something that's going to be interesting to look at. I've been following most weeks of EU contenders over the weeks, and I mean, I was just falling asleep looking at most of the matches there. So uh, I was falling asleep because that team was just dominating everyone. So definitely something interesting to look at in our next episode, which we have apparently already recorded, if I am to be trusted. Uh, but we haven't. So, so yeah,
Unless you
we
got
can.
your time machine working. I
Yeah,
don't know.
I'm Doctor Strange with the time stone, and yeah, never mind.
Yeah, you can
Just
round things
just
off then, I think, Nightwing.
no, just end the episode. I should shut up. Just end it. Just end me.
Alright, so if you guys like the episode, be sure to actually like the episode. And then do the usual YouTube stuff like, comment, subscribe, turn on the bell icon, share the video, and uh, help us keep the conversation about the league alive and fresh. And as usual, we will see you in a couple of days with the London Spitfire review. So bye bye, good night, and I think I'll let Nightwing sleep now. See ya.